Okay, welcome everyone. We have a very engaging session today on a topic that we are all very passionate about. So want to make sure we get started on time. We have really a limited amount of time to hear from some of these thought leaders on stage with me today. Also, for those of you that have questions or come up with questions as we're doing the discussion here, we are going to try to allocate a few minutes at the end for some Q&A. So when we're done, we'll have somebody with a mic roving around. And then if we don't get to your question today, please be sure to stop by the Planalytics booth afterwards. That's 4039 up on the third floor. We'd be happy to continue the conversation with you. Okay, so why don't we get started here? And again, thank you everyone for joining our Big Ideas session today, Climate Proofing Retail. The esteemed panelists that you're going to hear from in a moment are going to share thoughts on how retailers can both assess and address the opportunities as well as the risk that weather and weather-driven volatility brings to the business. So, and we certainly have a lot of volatility to talk about right now. In a lot of cases, weather is in the news, and right now, weather is the news. Certainly our hearts go out to those in Southern California that are being affected by the devastating wildfires, as well as, there was a lot of weather impact in parts of the South as well. So there's a lot that's happening right now, and we certainly appreciate the businesses, the retailers, the retail suppliers that are doing a lot right now, both as a business and as individuals to help those that are affected. So let's get started. My name is Evan Gold. I'm the EVP of Partnerships and Alliances at Planalytics. I am thrilled and honored to be joined on stage today by our three panelists, Catherine Cullen from the NRF, Sammy Lakshmanan from PwC, and Fred Fox from Planalytics. So I'm going to ask each member of our panel to give a very quick introduction to their respective roles, and then we'll dive in. Catherine?
Thanks, Evan. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Cullen. I lead Retail and Consumer Insights at the National Retail Federation. I'm very excited to be on this panel today, though I feel like the least qualified person on the weather. But we've been thrilled to work with Planalytics for some time, understanding the impact of weather on the retail industry and really delivering insights with them to our members. So excited to be here today.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So Sammy, partner in PwC. So I look after all things kind of in that intersection of digital and sustainability. And when we're talking about sustainability today, we'll talk a little bit about resilience as well, because that's, in my mind, what it is. Really anything all around like how we can use data to better inform decisions. That's really where at least my career has been at for the last 25 years. So.
And Fred Fox, co-founder and CEO of Planalytics. Thrilled to be here today with, of course, the NRF and PwC, our partners as we go out there to solve one of the greatest challenges facing retailers today, which is weather volatility. And of course, thrilled to be here with Evan Gold as well.
Thank you, Fred. And thanks again. We appreciate the partnership and support from PwC as well as the NRF, as well as your leadership support and insights that you provide to all of us here. Okay, so a quick few notes in terms of the terms and definitions, things that you may hear us talk about here today. You may hear us use this term weather sensitivity, and that is the percent of sales that are directly attributable to the weather. So for example, the retail industry as a whole has a 3% weather sensitivity. So that means at a top level in a typical year, roughly 3% of total sales can be impacted by weather. And obviously that changes for individual categories and locations. Weather volatility is the financial size of that impact. So the 3% I referenced earlier, that equates to roughly $1 trillion every year that are in flux due to the impact of the weather. And then the third thing that you'll hear us talk about today is weather-driven demand, or WDD for short. That is the specific metric that quantifies the impact of weather and weather alone on consumer purchasing for every item, every store, every time period. So with that backdrop in mind, let's dive in, and we'll start with the series of questions directed to a panelist, and then for the other panelists, feel free to chime in as well. So Catherine will direct the first question to you, and we'll start at a high level. Part of your role at the NRF is related to trends, research, and insights, which certainly are important to retailers to represent their interests. Can you talk a little bit about how you and the NRF view the impact of weather across the retail industry and how that affects the members that you serve?
Of course. So weather is something we've been starting to pay closer attention to over the last, I would say, 7 or so years for a couple of reasons. One, we tell the story of the industry, and when major weather impacts occur, one of the questions that happens is what is going on with retail? How is this going to impact retail sales? How are retailers responding? And secondly, is because we are also always striving to deliver better value to our members and help them understand the factors impacting their business. And in today's environment, where it's highly competitive, where it's increasingly easy for new entrants to come into the market, every little bit of data and information on your customer, on your business helps. And so weather and understanding weather can be a competitive edge. We first started this by really looking at and thinking about the impact of major weather events, because that's what we were thinking about. But, as we've worked on this issue more closely, and certainly it's something we actually released a report with Planalytics this past year, looking at how retailers can think about planning for unprecedented weather events, because you may not be able to predict when the next hurricane is going to happen, but you know it's going to happen. And you can start to think about what to expect leading up to that, during the event, and after, to make sure that you're delivering the best value for your customers, your business. And certainly, retailers do a lot to help with rescue events, to help with support during these times as well. So that was our initial focus. But the more we've talked to Planalytics, the more we've talked to our members, we also saw the need to talk about the daily weather impact of weather and how much that drives sales. I think in the report we say, something like 90% of I'm forgetting the exact stat. I should know this off the top of my head. Of weather volatility is sort of day to day. And, a snowy day might make you get hot chocolate instead of an iced coffee, or might redirect your path. And so we've been paying a lot more attention to those daily impacts as well, and looking to really follow how that shapes the consumer and therefore the industry.
Yeah, that's great. And so you talked a little bit about kind of the day in and day out weather, talked a little bit about the extreme weather. Let's dive into that, right? It's often said that climate is what we expect, but weather is what we get. So Fred, I'm going to direct this next question to you. Really want to talk a little bit about extreme weather, which is often very disruptive. And we're in a period now in the US where we get a $1 billion weather event once every 3 weeks. Now, compare that to the 1980s, it was roughly once every 4 months. So the weather is more volatile today than it's been ever before. Matter of fact, I think in 2024, we had 24 of those type of events that were over $130 billion. And we're 2 weeks into 2025, and some of the original estimates are, almost half of that already. So weather volatility and extreme weather is very significant. And while many see it as risks and disruptions, Fred, for retailers and businesses who are prepared and they have plans in place, the volatile weather can actually provide an opportunity for them to best serve their customers as well as the communities that where they're needed the most. So can you talk a little bit more about the opportunities and risks that extreme weather brings and what tactical applications that retailers can look to employ in those situations?
Weather affects everybody every day, and weather volatility drives consumers to buy or not buy. Weather volatility is the greatest single driver of consumer buying decisions. And extreme weather does that 5x, 10x, 20x more. It really drives consumers to get ahead of any forecast event. And one of the things we've been working on at Planalytics is how do you forecast in terms of sales extreme events that have not occurred in a company's historical record, 4 or 5 years, 6 years. So we've spent several years creating a capability that allows us to sort of forecast the forecast of what's going to happen on extreme events being tropical, snow, heat waves, everything you can think of. And we've been testing it now with a group of clients over the last 2 years, and have just launched Planalytics Extreme with an X, because our marketing guys had to say something that sounded creative. And it's a really nice add-on to what we're doing, because it starts to get at how consumers react when a forecast of extreme weather hits. And of course, we all know from our personal experience, because we're all consumers, how that forecast will drive us going to the stores. When snow hit the Northeast last week, how many went to the stores the day or two before, me included, to buy? So it definitely drives it. And retailers, of course, have to be able to make sure their stores are in stock in the right place at the right time. So Extreme is a real driver of business, and it's one that we're helping companies take advantage of to be stocked in a proper way, no matter what the event is.
Yeah, so the extreme weather can really not only impact consumers, but impact retailers. So Sammy, I want to direct this next question to you so we can really dig a little bit deeper here. Because again, we talked about how both climate and weather are impacting retailers and consumers, but there's a lot of use cases to employ to help businesses manage this. That can be reporting as well as other activities around merchandising and operations to better gain insights on what's happening, support sustainability initiatives. So can you share some of the common use cases at a more practical or realist, real level that retailers are employing?
Yeah, no, happy to. Great question. Maybe the first use case I'll start with is everyone's favorite word, regulation. I'm sure we're all thrilled to death about it, but if you look at what's happened over the last, call it 3-4 years, you kind of mentioned about 7 years, regulations around climate, weather, all the climate change type stuff, that's increasing, right? And people are starting to see it has a material effect. And so you're starting to see a lot more financial disclosures, right? So think your CFO office, right? So your CFO having to report on material impacts on weather volatility or climate volatility. And that's becoming more and more material. So you're now starting to see the financial world starting to wake up that there is an impact, whether it's on customers, operations, and so on and so forth. And so you're starting to see companies starting to really up their game in terms of data, right? So just as you think about how all the systems and processes and all that kind of stuff you have around sales data, we're having to do the same things around climate data. And that's a new muscle that people are having to kind of build and train on themselves. They used to do it on a voluntary basis, but now as these new regulations start to stand up, right, whether it's around freshness, food traceability, whether it's around corporate sustainability out of Europe or Asia, whether it's around traceability, you're starting to see a lot more regulation coming in to better understand the resilience of a company. And that's really what weather volatility is about. Now let's couple to where does that actually come into practicality for operation? My favorite use case is always the impact on supply chain, right? You think about the impact of weather volatility on your suppliers. We saw that during COVID. You talked about weather events last year, interesting event, when we had all the hurricanes on the East Coast, there was a massive shortage in IVs, right? IV bags, just because the facilities that made them were affected in North Carolina. So you're starting to see supply chains affecting downstream operations because your suppliers aren't able to get it. My other favorite one is shipping products from Kansas to Washington. It's starting to get harder because as the weather rises, those rail lines are actually starting to expand more, so it's actually interrupting rail traffic. Not something you would have thought of, but that is a material impact. So you're starting to see goods and products and services being affected by weather-related events, right? So as people are getting more and more attuned to having to report this data, getting a better handle on data, especially in terms of financial, they're now taking and using it for customer expectations. One last use case that I find is, whether you how you think about sustainability or climate change, the one thing that's clear, especially from a customer perspective, is that their perceptions are changing, their expectations are changing, and that personalization around, whether it's, food waste, whether it's around carbon emissions, that's increasing from the consumer side. And the more that we can use this weather-related data, the weather-sensitive, weather-driven demand to really drive that sort of connection between what customers are expecting and driving your operations to really kind of minimize waste, emissions, supply chain risks, all that kind of good stuff that affects our day-to-day operations, drives cost up, means that's actually savings we can pass on, but more importantly, we can drive better products, more, sustainable, more resilient products to our customers, which is what they're hopefully driving for.
Yeah, I mean, you talked through some very tactical applications, but in reality, this is a very strategic type of function to better serve your customers, as well as a board level initiative to help support things like you were talking about from a sustainability perspective. So those were some great examples. And really, let's, I guess, pivot a little bit and talk now more around what retailers can do about this, right? So we talked around some of the challenges, what some of the opportunities are. Catherine, I'll direct this next question to you. To support the research and insights that you provide to the industry, the NRF has a Center for Retail and Consumer Insights. So it's a great value add for retailers as well as all NRF members. Can you talk a little bit more about the center, the content, how members can access it, and where people can go to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I just wanted to build a little bit on kind of some examples of some of the value we've seen. We turn to some of the weather data around, holiday, around things like that to see what's popping for consumers in the moment. But when we released this report this past summer with Planalytics around, how retailers can think about how different sectors and their categories might be impacted by a major weather event. It talked about, which sectors might expect increases in demand leading up to an event. So groceries, water stocking up, during an event, and then post with repairs, lost sales, maybe from eating out that might not be made up. And what I found really interesting is after the hurricanes this fall, we actually did an economic analysis using credit and debit card data, specifically on the Florida region, and it showed exactly the same pattern that had been demonstrated by the weather-driven demand data. So, but that's all backwards looking versus having tools where you can think in advance of what's being impacted, what's driving consumers, and no one wants these hurricanes, but how do you guide your business and your consumer responsibly through that? So that helped us kind of come to the realization we needed to continue feeding out these weather insights to our retailers, and also start focusing a little bit more on those more immediate impacts of weather on product and on different regions. So as Evan mentioned, we have a Center for Retail and Consumer Insights. It has a lot of resources out there, both for the general public as well as for our members specifically. We actually do have a booth. It doesn't have a location, but it's on the third floor of the North Hall next to the podcast studio. And we have some screens up if you want to kind of dig a little bit more into some of this. We have data on retail transactions, but the latest thing we've launched is the Retail Weather IQ with Planalytics, and this is a weekly look refreshed every Monday at 10 a.m., looking at some of the products that were most impacted both favorably and unfavorably by weather. And so this is available to anyone. You can check it out, get a sense of what might be moving the needle, what might be most impacted by weather. If you want to dive a little deeper and you're an NRF member or you're thinking about being an NRF member, you can log in and actually see this data broken out by some of the top 10 metro areas. So seeing how different parts of the country might be impacted, as well as some snapshots of how weather across the country is comparing to last year, both in terms of temperature and precipitation. This just scratches the surface of weather-driven insights that some of our partners offer, but it's tools that we wanted to put in the hands of members to remind them that weather is playing a role for their customer and helps guide some of their decisions.
Yeah, I appreciate you walking through that and partnering with us on this. I think for a lot of folks, this may be some new information, understanding how to both measure and ultimately manage the impact that weather has at a very strategic as well as a tactical level. And as Catherine said, as the NRF as an industry is providing insights to support and help businesses address the challenges. So, Sammy, I'm going to direct this next question to you, because the activities, as you talked about earlier, they're both at a board level, they're at a tactical level. Maybe talk a little bit in your experience as you've worked with so many companies, maybe with some of the leading retailers that you come across, what some of the things that those are doing today, as well as those who may not be far along in their journey, some things they can think about to get started in the adoption of weather and climate analytics.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And I'm going to keep using the word data because I'm a big data geek. But what I find interesting is when you talk about leading retailers, I think what they're doing is they're leveraging this data that exists. I mean, when you think about it, we've got sales data, we've got credit card transactions, we've got inventory data, et cetera. And we have this weather data that's sitting out there. We've got tremendous analytics that Plan Analytics has done. And what I've seen leading retailers do is really take advantage of that, right? The ones that are actually using that data, embedding it into their operations, using it in a real-time basis, because it's out there, right? Ironically enough, we do it in our day-to-day world, right? We do it. My wife's loves looking at the weather app probably about 8 times a day. But anyways, but it influences what I wear, what I buy, why would I not do that as a business? Because that information is there. I think for the companies that are struggling with it, I think often it feels this is too much. Like, this is a lot of work and there's a lot of effort. And I'm going to use the other buzzword of the year is AI. And I think one thing that AI has done for us, it's made things simpler. Now, I'm not going to push the magic hype button. It's not going to magically solve anything with a push button. But what I think it has done is it has simplified our ability to analyze this, connect the data, solve some of the messy data quality issues, democratize that data so that people can access it, in a much easier format. They can interact with it, they can chat with it, whatever the case might be. So I think part of this is showing real life examples of where, even at a micro level, whether it's an individual, location, region, or transaction or product, can actually be useful. And then by that, building that change. I mean, what's interesting to me is that the business case sort of writes itself. It's just taking advantage of that business case is, I think, what most people have a hard time, making that leap of faith, for lack of a better word. But honestly, it's not a big leap with the data that's already available and investments that we're already making around, consumer expectations and AI.
Yeah, I certainly am glad you brought up the AI piece. It's something we've talked about a lot, and certainly something that I know a lot of retailers are thinking about. So I appreciate you weaving that here into the conversation. Let's talk a little bit more about sustainability and the changing climate. Catherine, from an overall NRF perspective, it's an area of focus for a lot of retailers, certainly for the NRF. Can you talk a little bit about why this is so important to the NRF and its members, and how you think about it from a weather perspective as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Sammy covered some of this, but sustainability and sustainability initiatives impact retailers on a number of fronts. Certainly, regulations and regulatory requirements, consumer interest and demand, the impact on the supply chain and just business operations, and also I think a shift in mindset on the part of retailers as they think about how they want to build their business moving forward, what makes sense, for them, their products and their customers. Certainly sustainability is a huge topic. It touches a lot of different points, but the climate and the impact on the climate is certainly part of it. So we have a Center for Sustainability and Sustainable Retail. And as part of that, we do talk a lot about the weather, about how retailers' products and supply chain, are impacted by or can impact or be more sustainable when it comes to the climate. So certainly something that's on our minds. It's a priority for many of our members, but it's a big space and there's a lot of work to be done.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just to add one more point to your point, it also affects your workforce. So when you think about a weather-driven event, as much as we think about our customers, we've got employees, contractors, suppliers that are trying to get to stores, trying to work in whatever operations, and a lot of times they're as much affected as any other demographic. And I think understanding the weather-related volatility can really help a company respond to the needs of their employees, whether they need more support, need time off, or we need to bring people in from other places to support. So, I think it's a great way to actually retain employee engagement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Being proactive in that is going to be really helpful for a lot of businesses. So we've talked a lot about sustainability. We've talked about a changing climate. We've talked about extreme weather. Catherine, you talked earlier about just kind of the day in and day out weather, because as much as the extreme weather grabs the headlines, it's often the day in and day out changes that have a significant influence on consumer purchasing. So Fred, I'll direct this next question to you. Can you talk a little bit more about how that everyday weather influences consumer behavior, and ultimately why and how retailers should turn to analytics to help assess and address that impact?
Well, I'm going to quote Sammy here, who said that the business case should write itself. And in a sense, that's what we're really talking about. I mean, weather is the greatest external driver, as I said before, of consumer purchasing decisions. Yet it's the least understood, the least analyzed, and the least used. So that really creates the opportunity that we are filling at Planalytics, which is to capture that volatility, to quantify it, and then to put it back into a form that companies can use. And as Evan said, it's really that day-to-day change that has a lot of the impact. If you look at a head of lettuce versus, let's say, a sweater, a sweater is going to be a lot more weather impacted, maybe about 15% volatility any given time due to weather. A head of lettuce is maybe 0.5%. But you sell a lot more heads of lettuce every day. So in dollar terms, the impact on a head of lettuce is quite large, even though the weather impact is much smaller than a sweater that you sell a lot less of. So again, it says everyday changes that if you can capture them and then to really plan around them can add up to very large dollars back into the business.
Yeah, that's really important to understand the difference between sensitivity and volatility. So we have about a little less than 2 minutes left. Are there any questions that are out there? If you can maybe raise your hand. And I think we have somebody with a mic. It's hard for me. Oh, it looks like there's one over here. And while you're doing that, there is a session tomorrow, Big Ideas session in Expo Hall, Stage 3, Level 3. You can hear from 3 customers talking about this in more detail.
It is on. Sorry. My question is, I've often joked with my husband that the job I would love to have most is a meteorologist, because you can be like completely wrong and still keep your job. So I'm curious, because weather is something you can't control and you can't predict, and you could have a forecast of 2 inches and get 10 inches of snow or whatever, how does this deal with the volatility of that the weather doesn't actually do what we think it's going to do?
So I'm going to use an old phrase here that you can't control the weather, but you can control how it impacts your business. So in a sense, there's a lot we can do with weather. And it really depends on the use of weather. So if you're using it for short-term replenishment marketing, if you're using it for business performance, that's all within the realm of pretty good weather data that's out there to use. If you're using it for planning next season, no, we don't know the weather next season, but we can statistically trend in a way by removing weather data from one's plans. Weather repeats itself maybe 70, 80% of the time, or doesn't repeat itself 70, 80% of the time. So it's only 20% of the time weather will repeat itself. So there's this trend that we can statistically analyze to at least improve people's ability on planning around weather and not planning on last year's weather to reoccur. So the weather's not perfect, but the business planning is not perfect either. So we're using weather to improve that type of planning effect. Did that answer the question? Okay.
Great. So I think we are about out of time. I would encourage you, again, other questions, comments, we'll be around for a couple minutes, or come visit Planalytics at booth 4039. Can we get a round of applause for our speakers today? Thank you very much for your insights and partnership. Have a great rest of the show. Thank you.